The market is fooling you. The market is fooling us all. As we can see in the background, Bitcoin is at a very, very interesting region for the long term. I do believe that this past week of price action is very compelling as to what's most likely to happen here. And that's going to be the focus of the day as Bitcoin essentially spins its wheels at the $60,000 region. A major opportunity is about to present itself. I don't necessarily think that it's here like this exact moment, but very, very soon in terms of timing. In fact, this whole week has really been that. Anyways, before we get into this analysis, I do want to say I've not watched the debate yet. I've not watched it. I've been very much looking forward to it. Please, for the love of God, do not fucking spoil it for me in the comment section, because I've been waiting for this for a very, very long time, okay? Been really waiting for this. And also, I should let you know, you can still get a nice little discount on all of the products or services in the Teachable store below with the code in all capitals, Midsummer 100. Again, that's all capitals, Midsummer 100, and you can even actually get 1 month for free of the Krown Quant automation service, which provides you not just strategy templates, but also a tool that will automate your backtesting and automate your trade execution if you want to take it that far. All right, sweet. Let's jump into the content of the day. Big focus on the Pi cycle indicator here, which is accurately called all of the macro highs and macro lows, or cycle lows, I should say, for Bitcoin since its inception. And that is, of course, one way to use it. That is one of the that was one of the major compelling factors that we were looking at for calling Bitcoin's macro low about a year and a half ago. But there is another sort of venue to be looking at this from that I do think is very compelling for our current sort of iteration of price action. So what I want to do now is I want to zero in on what we're currently experiencing and explain the sort of signal that we're looking for. So as you can see here, once Bitcoin gets going after its cycle low, we do see a nice test towards that white long moving average. That's the one that my cursor's on right now. In fact, I'll put on my drawing tools. This one right here. After that test, we have seen Bitcoin come all the way down to this green moving average. Okay, all I'm just saying now is just, hindsight bullshit analysis. But we have seen this many times in the past, and I do want to bring you back to even 2020, actually, or 2019. Bitcoin gets that first test into the long moving average, and then where does it come down to? It comes down to that green moving average. Of course, in this case, we did see a black swan, and Bitcoin did ultimately lead lower. But of course, black swans are black swans, and even from there, that same sort of interplay did hold true. First test reject, second move down to the 55, or sorry, not the 55, but the green moving average, and that is essentially, in hindsight, a very long-term good region to be maintaining a position, or starting a position, I should say. Same thing over here in 2016. First test up to the white moving average, reject, comes back down. Where does it base? Right here on that green moving average. We even see a massive wick below on that first move. That's completely fine. Really no major closures below, and as you can see, long-term, hindsight, again, phenomenal area. We actually see several iterations of that particular instance in this cycle. Test here, reject, comes down to the 50, or not the 55, but the green moving average. Test over here, same thing. Test over here, same thing. And then we have cycles prior than that as well. We do see the 2012 iteration, first test in the white moving average, reject, comes down here, bases, and then upwards and onwards throughout the rest of the cycle. And you do see a few more iterations over here in 2011 and 2010, actually. Anyways, going back to our current iteration, yes, in the event of a black swan, could we see things theoretically go lower? Yeah, absolutely. But I do think that it is once again very enlightening that this week we do see a test into that green moving average, the short EMA. And so far, Bitcoin having a nice wick, as we get very, very close to closing this weekly. Typically my stance is that wherever Friday closes for CME is where you're going to see spot price action close for the weekly as well. So, Bitcoin kind of hanging around this region, just around $61,000 is probably good enough for me. And as long as Bitcoin maintains above there on a closing basis, I look at this as likely another reaccumulation zone. Very likely, however, this is going to take some time, I do suspect. Moving on from there, I do want to get into the daily statistics for today's range. No, I want to get into the hash ribbons chart before we get into that. Again, I won't go through the full rigmarole on the explanation right here, but I do want to say, for the people who have been following up on this and who know where I'm kind of going with this, the average amount of days between a capitulation signal and the next blue buy signal on average is just under 42 days. The reason why I'm bringing this up right now is because we did see the initial capitulation signal start in middle of May. And from that date to current date, it is 45 days. So we're starting to get above that average. So, that next blue buy signal is probably right around the corner in terms of timing. And if and when that does happen, I would be looking at the last major low for Bitcoin, which was right here at 58,500, as extremely, extremely, extremely likely the next major low, for Bitcoin before, not really testing that anytime soon, if at all ever again. I know that sounds crazy, but that is the interplay that we have seen on these signals in the past. Anytime that you have seen the blue buy signal printed, that last major low for Bitcoin was the low before never going below it ever again. In fact, we saw a very similar interplay to this in 2023, last year, summer actually as well. In fact, even the price action, is kind of similar as well. I've seen people throw fractals on this, just kind of copying and pasting the price action. I almost never see that work out too well, but the same sort of structure here does still apply. You can see prior to this blue buy signal, the last major low was this red circle. And while Bitcoin did come back down around and test around it, completely fine, maybe even wick below it, although in this case, I don't think it did, but that's still completely fine. No closures below. So I do think that we're setting up for something relatively similar to that yet again. And so while this one is probably right around the corner from firing off, again, we could likely extrapolate. I am making a slight assumption here, but I do think it's probably gonna hold true. That this will be the prior low to that blue buy signal, and of course, the closer that we are to that level, the greater long-term risk-reward profile, you probably have if you are a long-term investor. So again, I've been saying it throughout this past week. This week for me was a week to be looking for potentially long-term positions. Take with that what you will. Doesn't mean that I'm going to be right for, in this case, but so far so good. It has been working, in this cycle, especially for the last year and a half and slightly more now. Anyways, moving on from there, let's get into the daily statistics. We can see that Friday has a slight edge in terms of favoring negative closures versus positive closures, with 56% of all of the Fridays since 2024 began closing negatively. The returns, both for the positive and negative side, are just around about 2.25%. So let's see what that would look like from today's open. And let me just blow this up right here. Okay. All right, there we go. I feel like I'm Biden, like, hey, what's going on with this chart? How do I make it? I can't read it. It's like actually really hard to read right now. To the downside, again, perhaps another retest of this sort of low that we've seen throughout this week on a closing basis. That might be, closer to $60,000 even. To the upside, 2.25% would put actually Bitcoin back around $63,000 or a little bit above there. I am a little bit more biased towards Bitcoin likely testing the bottom side of that first before a bounce. But just as we said yesterday, late Thursday to basically end of today, I do expect this bounce to really start to begin. And realistically, this is a very tight range here, regardless of that. So, Bitcoin maybe coming back down to 60,000 or very close to it, completely fine. I would be looking for that as a nice bouncy region if it does intraday here today. And especially if Bitcoin closes, unchanged or even up, that's going to be really, 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 really good indication that we do see this bounce basically begin today. I mean, that's confirmation of it, obviously, and then likely extend into early next week. Anyways, moving on from there, just another update on this, the 2-day time frame on CME for stochastic momentum. We have seen it now hit, or it's basically hitting this long-term regression, which has been governing the low since actually August of last year. So basically last year's major consolidation is where this one started, in this region right here. That's where the initial anchoring point is. Then we have this area right here is the next connection, as well as this area right here as the connection after that. So what we'd be expecting after this next closure, which is tonight, by the way, is that this number, the pivot for stochastic momentum to turn back up on the 2-day time frame for CME, will likely come significantly down, giving it a chance for price action to perhaps pop back above it early next week. Again, that'd be sort of like the next domino to be looking for if this one is going to bounce, and probably bounce quite well. from this region. If we go over the daily time frame, obviously this one's already flipping back up as long as Bitcoin's above 59,750. So even if today we see Bitcoin kind of retest around 60,000 bucks, it'll actually still maintain that positive curvature while the 2-day time frame, really starts to come down hard here. 3-day time frame is obviously still, heavily downside angled as long as Bitcoin's below 70,500. And then the weekly, which is closing today for CME, is very likely to remain down as well. So, it's still best case scenario for Bulaws that Bitcoin trades sideways here, basically. We do see the makings of a weekly high or low. It does seem to me kind of similar. I think the more obvious chart actually is probably looking at Coinbase. Coinbase seems a lot more of a steady consolidation right here than Bitcoin spot. And we do expect these things to kind of trade hand in hand, right? So in this case, Coinbase very likely putting in a little bit of a low here. Yes, it might retest like 215, but ultimately this is really starting to shape up as a long-term healthy consolidation, especially as long as it holds this week's low at like 210 or so, something like that. This is really shaping to be up, again, one long-term consolidation around the highs. Of course, below this week's low, you're probably gonna have a pivot there coming up to this next week, meaning that if Bitcoin does trade below there, it's get ready for some big bad downside. I'm not ready to say that hopium for mid 40s is done just yet. But so far, the Bullets kind of doing what they need to do in order for this to really start to shape up as the next sort of higher low. Same thing on Bitcoin as well. It's kind of one of the same here. So yes. Anyways, what this is likely to amount to, assuming that Bitcoin closes today above, 60,000 or especially 61,000 bucks, is best case scenario sideways probably for most of July, at least like the couple opening weeks, just eat up time here as oscillators reset. And then, something like this into probably end of summer, really. I do think that the general summer consolidation is going to be similar to what we saw back on last summer, not necessarily in terms of price structure, but just in terms of time and length. We're probably looking at some relatively similar, and then the real market begins like late August, early September, something like that. Is what the Bulaws are looking for. If you're bearish, you're looking for this one to like break down. I mean, hopefully starting today. If you're bearish, like it's starting to really spin its wheels a little bit too much. So I do still maintain my overall stance that Bitcoin a lot more likely to bounce from this region before, even if we were to break down later. If you're like super bearish, it's more likely to bounce from this region first. Maybe after one more retest of the low, something like this is what I'd be looking for. Boom, pop back up. If you're bearish, you're probably looking for a lower high, like between 64, 65, something like that. Anyways, as of right now for CME here, or sorry, this is actually not CME. Let me go to spot price action. We can see that the volatility contraction phase is looking like it's well underway here. So again, it might retest these lows at 60,000, but very likely bounces out of this region first before anything else. And whenever this one does start to bounce, which I do think is probably going to happen today, the median here on the daily HPDR band is going to be a nice little target, nice little magnet for price action. Currently, it's at 65,400. I expect that will move down coming into early next week, probably around 64-ish, give or take. But I imagine that that's probably going to be a bounce target coming into like next week. Again, that is, of course, if we go over here to a nice little Fibonacci retracement, that is, that would be, basically around the 382, at least maybe the 50% level. These are still bearish retracements here, to be fair, but for right now, more likely to bounce than not. I highly doubt that we're going to get like this. Always possible, right? But I do think it is low probability here. If you're really bearish, you're probably looking for this one to bounce back up and get rejected like below 65. That would look pretty damn bad. But for now, most likely bounce. And then we probably get resolution next week as to, does Bitcoin survive or not? Because bears kind of are on the clock here. Just like Bulaws were on the clock about a month ago when the ball was in their court. Now the ball is in the bears' court. And so, time is going to be, I suppose, somewhat running against them. But yes, anyways, I think that's a good place for me to be leaving off. Again, don't fucking spoil the goddamn debates for me because I'm very excited about this, okay? I'm very excited about this. It's hard to make videos when you're so looking forward to it. But Elsa and I, we wanted to make sure that we watched together tonight because we've been waiting for it for so long. It's so fucking entertaining. Anyways, I'll leave you right there. We'll be back tomorrow. Again, I suspect today's going to be another sort of more boringish day than not. But during these boring days, important things do happen. And I do believe that this one's going to be, especially this weekly closure, is going to be quite enlightening as to what to expect early on next week. Still leaning towards retest of the lows, perhaps somewhere around there, and then bounce. Anyways, that's it for today. Take care, much love, and see you hopefully next time.